Hey everyone, this is Mr. Regner and this is our review for Unit 8. We're looking today here at our study guide for Part 2. So let's get right to it. Here we go. Our study guide on Part 2 begins with question number 1, which is hopefully a very easy question as long as we remember some key details. So first, in the question, it tells us a rectangle's height is 25% of its base. Now the base is 20 meters. So I'm basically figuring out here what is 25% of 20. So I can do this in multiple ways. I can convert 25% into a decimal, into a fraction, whatever I choose to do. I'm going to do a fraction here just for fun. So I have 1/4, which is 25%. I'm going to multiply that by the base, which is 20. And I'm going to call that 20 over 1. Right? So that becomes 20 over 4. Now I can reduce that down and figure out that 20 divided by 4 equals 5. And that's what my base is. So my base is going to be 5 meters. And I know it's meters because the base is listed as meters. My formula to find the area of a rectangle is area equals base times height. That's a formula that we should just know and have memorized. So there's nothing really stopping us there. If you don't know that already, know it for your test. When it says substitution, I'm going to take out my base and my height and plug that in. So I have area equals base is 20 times my height, which I know is 5 because I figured that out up top. So now I have the area of the rectangle, which is just going to be area equals 20 times 5. Well, 20 times 5 is going to be 100. And my label for area is always going to be square units. In this case, it's meters squared. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Number 2 says it's recommended that you leave at least a 15% tip for the server at a restaurant. Your bill is $64 and you leave a $10 tip. So did you give the recommended amount? And then explain. So here's some workspace down here that I can use, and I'm going to try to use that today for our video as well. So if I know it's a 15% tip and I know my total bill was $64, then I want to figure out what 15% of $64 is. So I'm going to take $64 and I'm going to multiply it by 15%. I can convert that by moving my decimal to the left 2 times. That's 0.15. Okay, I could also convert 15% into a fraction if I want, however I choose to do it. All right, so I'm going to take 64 times 15 hundredths. So 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 2 is 32. Add my placeholder 0. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 6 is 6. Add these together. 0 plus 0 is 0. 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 plus 3 is 9. Now I need to move my decimals. There's no decimals here. There's 2 movements here. So this gets moved over 2 times. So my total tip, 15% of $64, is going to be $9 and, whoops, I almost wrote that wrong, 60 cents. Okay, so if I left a $10 tip, did I leave at least 15%? We'd have to say yes. And then here's where we can explain it. And I can explain it by saying that 15% is $9.60, which is 40 cents less than what we left, because we left $10. All right, so your explanation here on the test doesn't have to be super fancy, but just tell me why you know that we left enough or we didn't leave enough. All right, moving on to number 3. Number 3 says you know that 24% of a number p is 96, so use this to find 48% of p. There's really 2 parts here to this question. I'm going to divide it right there in the middle. So if I have 24% of a number p is 96, I can write this out. I'm going to say 24% of p equals 96. So if I know that I can convert 24% into a decimal by moving my decimal point to the left 2 times, that equals 24 hundredths. If I'm multiplying that, because of means time times p, that's 24 times p equals 96. if I want to get P alone, I need to do the inverse operation, which means I'm dividing by 24 hundredths on both sides. This is going to cancel out and leave me with just P. 96 divided by 24 hundredths. If I don't know what it is, which I don't, I'm going to go ahead and do the math. So I have 24 hundredths going into 96. I need to move my decimal point over 2 places and move this to over 2 places. I'll fill in some zeros. So 24 goes into 96. I would have to kind of guess and check here, right? That's the only way that I can do this. Except, here's a little clue for you. On your test, we can use a calculator for this portion. So if you don't have a calculator, no worries. This is math you can't handle, but a calculator will save you some time on this. All right, so I'm going to guess that this is probably going to be 4 times. So 4 times 24, just in case you're curious. I have 4 times 4, which is 16. 4 times 2, which is 8, plus 1 is 9. That goes in evenly. So that was a miraculous guess on my part. How did I do that? Wow, I'm amazing. 24 times 4, I already figured out, is 96. That's 0. I need to bring down my 0. 24 goes into 0, 0 times. Bring down my other 0. 24 goes into 0, 0 times. That means that P equals 400. So if P equals 400, I'm going to use this to find 48% of P. All right, so now I have got my second part. So I want to know what 48% times 400 is going to be. Now I can move my decimal point over 2 places, so I know this is really going to be 400 times 48 hundredths. All right, so let's do the math. 8 times 0, 0. 8 times 0, 0. 8 times 4, not 0, 32. Add my placeholder 0, 4 times 0 is 0. 4 times 0, 0. 4 times 4, not 0, 16. Now I can add them together. 0 plus 0 is 0, 0 plus 0 is 0, 0 plus 2 is 2, 3 plus 6 is 9, and 1 plus nothing is 1. That means I have a number down here, but I have to add my decimal points. So I have no decimal points, 2 decimal places, move it over 2 places. So my answer is 192. Again, a lot of work going into this question, but it all pays off because I was able to figure it out correctly. Let's move on now to page 2, or maybe just the back side of your study guide, and on to number 4. It says Jenny colored 40% of the drawings in her sketchbook. There are 22 sketches that are colored. How many sketches are in Jenny's sketchbook? So we want to make sure we understand this fully. 40% of the drawings have been colored. Okay? 22 are colored. So 22 is 40%. Does that make sense? 22 sketches are colored. 40% are colored. We want to know the total number that are in our sketchbook. And if we know that 22 is equal to 40%, then we're going to be able to use some math here and figure out exactly what the total would be. All right, so let's check it out. If I have 40%, that's 40 over 100. That's the same thing, right? That's just writing it like a ratio or like a fraction. 22 sketches are going to be colored. So 40% out of the total 100 is going to be equal to 22 colored sketches out of an unknown total. So we're just making an equivalent ratio. Okay? So if I look at this, I have 40%, 40 over 100. I have 22 over an unknown amount. I could reduce this down, maybe make this a little bit easier for myself, and that's maybe what I'm going to choose to do here. So I'm going to change this to just 4 over 10, and I'll keep this as 22 over x. Okay? Just kind of playing with the ratios, reducing them, coming up with equivalent ratios. Still going to be equivalent ratios. Let me think about what I'm doing to 4 to get to 22, right? That one's too tricky. Don't want to do it. Don't have to do it. Let me change this up and give me another one. I'm going to take 4/10 and reduce it down even more into 2/5. Well, now I'm playing on easy street here because this is easy stuff for me. I know that 2 times 11 is 22. So 5 times 11 is 55. So x is going to equal 55, which means there are 55 total sketches in Jenny's book. And I just realized now that you may not have seen some of that on the video, and I apologize. But basically what we should know is I took my fraction, or my percent, wrote it as a fraction, came up with some equivalent fractions until I found one that would make my life way easier with 2 going into 22 11 times. Again, that's probably the easiest way that I can explain number 4, and it's all about using equivalent ratios, equivalent fractions. Let's take a look now at number 5. Here it is. Number 5 says, on Monday, the student council sold 50 lollipops. Congratulations. On Tuesday, they sold 40 more lollipops. On those 2 days, they sold 45% of the total number of lollipops. What is the total number of lollipops? Well, that's an excellent question. So I know that they sold 50 on Monday. Tuesday, they sold 40. Okay, so 50 plus 40, that means that they sold 90 lollipops on those 2 days. 90 lollipops is going to be equal to 45% of the total amount of lollipops. So I know that the 45% can be written as 45 out of 100. 45 out of the total 100. I want to make an equivalent ratio where I have 90 lollipops sold out of the total unknown amount. All right, so this is a lot like number 4. Okay, and a lot like number 4, I can play with the ratios, play with the numbers here, but it just so happens that this one, probably easy enough for me to see. 45 goes into 90 2 times. I'd multiply it by 2. That means I can multiply 100 by 2 and get my answer. So that means x equals 100 times 2, which is 200. So the total lollipops sold is 200. All right. If I'm not sure about that, I could always go back and try to figure out what 45% of 200 is. And guess what my answer will be? 45. Or sorry, 90. Oh, I did that wrong. 45% of 200 is 90. All right. And that makes sense because that's what I just figured out. All right. So we can always check our math as well. We're on to the last question, sadly. And I appreciate all this time you spent watching this video and reviewing for your test. It's going to help you tremendously. I just know it. So let's take a look at number 6. Number 6 really is 6 different problems. We want to place all of these letters on our number line. Okay? So some of them are written as decimals. Some are written as fractions or mixed numbers. So don't let that fool you. We just want to make sure that we're putting it in the right spot. Let's start with letter A. It says negative 1 and 25 hundredths. If I look at this, here's negative 1. If I go more than negative 1, I'm going down here, 1 and 25 hundredths. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces in between. That would be 2400 or 25 hundredths, 50 hundredths, or 5 tenths, 75 hundredths, right? So I know that negative 1 and 25 hundredths is going to be point A. So on your test, make sure you make your point nice and large. Make sure you label it very clearly. So I know A is correct. Letter B, it says 1.5. I know that 0.5 can also be listed as 1/2. Maybe that's going to help me. I know 1/4 is the same as 0.25. Maybe that'll help me. So if I look at this, I have 0. Here's positive 1. And then this mark here would be 1.5. That's letter B. Letter C, it says negative 1 and 75 hundredths. I know that's the same as 3/4, right? So that'll make it easy. I'm going to go to negative 1 and 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. This would be letter C. Let me move on to letter D. Make that C clear first. This is 2 and 2/8. Ooh, throwing a curveball at me here. 2/8. Oh, man. I know that 2/8 is the same as 2 and 1/4 because I can reduce that down. When I look at 1/4, now I know what I'm talking about. I have 0, 1, here's 2, here's 2 and 1/4. That's letter D. Letter E, negative 3/12. What? This is so strange and bizarre for me, but luckily I can reduce this down. I know I can reduce it down by dividing each of these by 3. right? That gives me 1/4. That's negative 1/4. Here's 0. Here's negative 1/4. That's going to be point E. And then letter F here, it says negative 6/4. All right, I want to think of this about 2 seconds and realize that's an improper fraction. All right, if I turn that around, I could take 4 divided by 6, or how many times does 4 go into 6? It's going to be 1 whole. I'm going to have 2 left over. That's 2/4. That's negative, by the way. Negative 1 2/4. We don't usually think of it that way. We might think of it as negative 1 1/2 because I can reduce it down. So let's see, here's 0, here's negative 1, here's negative 1 1/2. I'm going to put that letter F right there in the middle. All right, so again, we've seen this before in some of our bell work. It's the same number line that we've seen in those cases, and so we want to make sure we're just plotting those points where they go. This, once again, has been our Unit 8 review for Part 2. Please review this video as often as you need to as you're studying and preparing for your Unit 8 test. Good luck on your test, and that's all I've got. This is Mr. Regner. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask me in class or email me outside of school.